Hi everyone, it's Kate from The Fold Line. I am back this week with the Sew Down. This is a roundup of stuff that we've seen, read, listened to, that we think you guys would find interesting to sort of keep you company while you're doing a bit of sewing at home. I've got some exhibitions as well, a couple of events. There's some really nice things in here. So grab a cup of tea. Everything that I mention will be linked down below, so if there's anything that you want to go and read or check out a bit more, there'll be links so you can go and find it. So I'm going to get started with a couple of articles that we found that were really interesting. So the first one is about Kylie and the Machine. If you haven't heard of them before, they are a brand that creates sewing labels that you put into your clothes. We stock them on the site. They're really fun, and it's an interview about the founder, Kylie, and talking about how she made the brand, how it all kind of came about. It's a really great article and I really enjoyed reading it because there was stuff in there that I didn't know about them, and yeah, it's great. Next up, I've got an article about community clothing, which is set up by Patrick Grant. I'm sure you guys know about it, but if you don't, he created a company a few years ago now with the concept was to keep manufacture within the UK. So the idea behind the business is that when factories, because factories obviously are not working at 100% all the time, in their downtime they use that time to make clothing which he sells, which kind of keeps the kind of factories, it makes their sort of turnover and their money management easier because they're kind of busy all the way through the year. So he has done a collaboration with Joni Clothing, which I thought was really interesting because if you haven't seen their clothes before, they're quite vintagey inspired, and I thought it was like an interesting mix. So there's an article all about him and why they've done it. So go and have a look and you can see the clothing for their collab. It was quite nice. Lots of stripes, which I'm very pro because I love a stripe. So a couple of, I've got an online event which I thought you guys, and I'm going to get a ticket to. I'm sure I've said it before, but there is a big Coco Chanel exhibit opening at the V&A in September. It's going to be amazing. Alongside that, they're doing an online talk about Coco Chanel and her life, and it's hosted by Justine Picardi, who wrote a book about her, and I love her writing. I think she's really great, and this I think will be really fantastic. So it's on Monday the 18th of September and it's £6 for the ticket, and I'm assuming that you get a link so you can watch it afterwards if you're not available on the night, but I'm going to get a ticket to that because I think it'll be really great and she really knows her stuff. So that's a nice little bit of online excitement. Sarah Pascoe next up. She has written a book called Weirdo, and she obviously is the judge on the Sewing Bee. She is doing some live events. I will pop a link. She popped it on her Instagram, and she's doing some in-person kind of things all around the UK, and I thought it might be interesting if you live like near one of the events. It might be worth going and seeing because I think it would be really fun. So she's got events on at the beginning of September. I will pop them in the link to it so you can go and see where she'll be, but it might be worth it if you're nearby. Next up, I've got two TV programs. So the first one is on Channel 4, and a couple of people have recommended this. I've watched the first episode and it's a really interesting concept. It's called The Unique Boutique, and they have a few people that come in each week who have specific needs, and the team sort of sew them something, an outfit. And I found it really, I've just watched the first one, I'm definitely going to watch the rest of them, but I found it really interesting learning about different modifications that people need for clothing. There was a woman who was going through cancer treatment, and she had to have these bags attached to the back of her body at all times. So it was like creating modifications that you need for that. There was a guy in a wheelchair who wanted to have an outfit that he felt really nice and then looked good when he was sitting down and standing up. And I just thought, as fellow makers, I found it really interesting watching it. So it's quite fun and kind of frivolous as well. There's lots of colour and brightness, and it's definitely worth checking out. A couple of people emailed about us this next thing. It's called A Stitch Through Time. It's on BBC iPlayer, and it's kind of the same format as Sewing Bee, but the people who are in it are kind of designers within their own right, so they design and make rather than just making. And it's set in Ulster, and the concept of it is to sort of teach people about. Apparently, it had a really, I didn't know this until I started watching it. Apparently, it had a really rich sort of textile industry, which is why they've done it. I would say, brutally honestly, it's not as good as a Sewing Bee, but if you're missing the Sewing Bee and you like that format, and then this is definitely worth going and checking out. So I've got a couple of books. The first one is from Esme Young. It's called Behind the Seams. I definitely have mentioned this before in a past sew down. Just to say that it's because I get most of my books via audiobook. She is reading the audiobook herself on Audible, which I really love when it's narrated by the person who wrote it. So if you haven't got the book yet and you like listening to it, then if you want to have Esme in your ears for 7 or 8 hours, which who doesn't, she's narrating her own book. So that for me was very exciting. Next book we have got, this is what Rachel is reading at the moment, and she keeps talking about it and saying how incredible it is. I spoke about it in a sew down before. It was a book that Rachel and I read a couple of summers ago, which we absolutely loved, called The Salt Path, written by Raina Wynn. And it's a memoir, so it's a true story about a couple who became homeless and walked the entire southwest coastal path. Rachel said that this feels kind of similar to that. So it's called The Wild Atlantic, Women Walking Ireland's West Coast. And she said it's really beautifully written, and they describe the nature, and I think you guys will really enjoy it. So that's on my list also to watch, to read once I've finished what I'm listening to at the moment. So I've got a couple of exhibitions. This one is not open yet, so it opens on the 16th of September until February the 11th. It's at the Design Museum in London, and I think this is going to be like worth coming to London to. It's called Rebel, 30 Years of Fashion. It's sponsored by Alexander McQueen, and it's a kind of look back at the last 30 years of fashion, and they've got some of early kind of big designers which are now really well known, some of their early collections. The British Fashion Council are involved as well, so I think it's going to be quite a big and interesting exhibition. So if you are thinking about coming to London in the next few months, definitely get yourself a ticket for this, because I think it'll be worth going to see. I will go and see it and I will report back, because I think it's going to be great. Next up, we've got basically the other end of the country in Edinburgh. There is an exhibition at the moment at the National Museum of Scotland about Beyond the Little Back Dress. And it's talking the sort of deconstruction of this like iconic garment. It looks like someone emailed and said it was really great. So if you are up in Edinburgh and fancy it, then this is definitely worth going and checking out. So now we are moving into the podcast land, and I have got quite a lot of podcasts for you. So buckle up. Some of them are kind of lovely, and some of them are quite hard-hitting, so just kind of there's quite a mix of stuff in here. So I'll start with the sort of textile related ones. So the first one is called Articles of Interest, and I've definitely spoken about this before. They take a topic each week and they sort of do almost like an academic deep dive into it, and I just listened to the one last week on Paisley, and it was really interesting, the history of it, the origins of it, which I had no idea, and it's just, they're really kind of well researched and like stuffed full of facts and interesting stuff. So if you haven't come across the podcast before, it's worth checking out, and definitely listen to the Paisley one, because I really, really loved it. So next up, anyone who I don't know if you saw, we did a Find My Pattern for the Barbie film, because obviously everyone's talking about Barbie at the moment. And there is a really fantastic podcast, which I wish I listened to before, but I've just found it. It's called Dress Fancy, and the host, called Lucy Clayton, tracks down Carol Spencer, who designed all of Barbie's outfits for 35 years, and she interviews her, and it's such a feel-good, lovely, interesting episode. So if you played with Barbies at any point in your life, I think you will enjoy this podcast. And on that note, if you did enjoy the Barbie film and didn't see my video the other week, I will say that do go and check out, there is an architectural digest where Margot Robbie takes you round the Barbie dream house, the actual set, and it's really incredible to watch as someone who is a fellow maker, how they made all the props that went in her house, like all the things they thought through. It was really, really fun and interesting. So definitely go and watch that if you haven't. So next up on the podcasts, I've got one called Tiny Acts of Bravery by Clover Stroud. Now, someone emailed me a while ago, just after my dad had died, and said, I've read this really amazing book written by Clover Stroud. I think you'd enjoy it. It's about sort of grief and stuff. And it was, she's an incredible writer. It was really interesting. And anyway, she has now started doing a podcast where she interviews people about bravery and what that means to them in different formats. And the people that she has interviewed are really interesting. She's a fantastic interviewer. The way she thinks and writes is just, I just wish I was more like that. And they are really, really lovely to listen to. So I feel I really love putting them in, going for walking the dog, and just you feel like you're in this like really amazing special conversation. So they are definitely worth going and checking out. I really am enjoying it a lot. So I've now got two podcasts which are quite hard to listen to but really interesting. So the first one will come with a bit of a trigger warning. This is called The Retrievals, and it's about a fertility clinic in Yale. I had heard about this article a while ago, and I've listened to the first episode, and I will say it is hard to listen to. So what happened was one of the nurses at Yale Fertility Clinic was completely addicted to fentanyl and was stealing the medicine and replacing it with saline solution. So the women who were going in to have these IVF procedures were having saline given to them as a painkiller rather than natural painkiller, and went on about the pain. Obviously they were in horrific pain. Can you imagine? I mean, it's just, the whole story is completely bananas. But the woman who has done the podcast, she used to work at This American Life. So she's just done and made this sort of series so well. It's really well researched, it's really interesting, but it does come with a bit of trigger warning. If you find that difficult, it might not be the one for you. It is a hard listen, but it's amazing, and it's in a collaboration with the New York Times as well. So that is my first hard-hitting one. My next hard-hitting, I'm obviously in a moment of like listening to, it's called Scamander. And it is the story of, and I remember this, I think she was one of the first people who did this, where a woman basically faked a illness and benefited from doing fundraising and receiving lots of free stuff for her illness. And it's quite a wild story. I'm only 2 episodes in, but if you like that sort of thing, it's kind of the story around it happening, and it's just, yeah, it's completely wild. So last but not least, I feel like I've gone like horror story, and now I'm moving into something very beautiful and gentle. So the last podcast that I've got is As the Season Turns, and I really love this if you haven't come across it before. So it comes out monthly, it's once a month, and they talk about everything that is happening within nature, how the sun is moving around the earth, what vegetables are in season, what plants you can expect to find in your garden. And it is the most relaxing thing I've ever listened to. And in the background while they're talking, there's like sounds of nature. I'm making it sound like it's really beautifully written. I also, if you have trouble sleeping, I think this would be a really lovely way to go to sleep, listening to like them talk about nature. And it's yeah, it comes out on the 1st of every month, so there is one imminent for September, but they are lovely. And I really enjoy actually like thinking about what, especially like vegetables that are in season. It's just, yeah, it's absolutely, I just love it. So if you haven't come across that, that's definitely worth checking out. I had to finish on like a nice note after my Sinister podcast. Anyway, I hope those were good and you found something nice to listen to. If there is anything that you've read or listened to or watched or anything that you want to share, please let us know down below, because this is what it's all about. I want to share like interesting stuff that we can all get stuck into, especially because we're all sitting at home when we're sewing generally on our own. It's really nice to have something in our ears, and it's nice that we're all listening to the same thing. So if there's anything that you think that we'd all love, let us know. And we'll be back soon with another video. Have a lovely, lovely rest of your weekend. Bye!